Welcome to Graveyard of Secrets, where the darkest legends come to life. Tonight, we uncover a mystery that has haunted a small town for over 50 years, the story of the Lantern Man of Black Hollow Road. A secret buried deep in the shadows, a warning that no one dared follow, until now. They said Black Hollow Road had been cursed since the summer of 1975. Travelers whispered about a lone figure seen at midnight, holding an old brass lantern, silently standing by the crooked oak at mile marker 6. Some swore he was warning drivers. Others claimed he was luring them into the woods. Locals called him the Lantern Man, and no one dared stop to find out why. When investigative journalist Clara returned to her hometown after 20 years away, she thought the legend was just a campfire tale. But while sorting through her late father's attic, she found a dusty lockbox containing yellowed maps, newspaper clippings about missing persons, and a photograph, a young man holding the exact same lantern. Scribbled on the back were the words, July 3, 1975, don't forget what we buried. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara began interviewing the few remaining townsfolk who remembered that summer. Their stories didn't match. Some claimed the Lantern Man was Tommy Barrett, a farmhand who vanished after being accused of theft. Others insisted it was Sheriff Ray Harlow, who knew too much and disappeared the same week. Everyone avoided one name, Eli Dempsey, Clara's father. Each night, Clara drove down Black Hollow Road, keeping her headlights low. On the third night, at exactly 12:13 a.m., the figure appeared, motionless, lantern glowing in eerie green. Gathering her courage, she slowed down instead of speeding past. But before she could stop, the figure raised its lantern and vanished into the fog. The next day, Clara followed the map from the lockbox to an overgrown path behind the crooked oak. There, buried beneath 50 years of roots and soil, she unearthed a rusted box filled with bones. Human bones. Tucked inside a leather pouch was a tarnished sheriff's badge, a gold wedding ring, and a fragment of stained fabric. But before Clara could call the police, someone else stepped from the trees, a man much older than she expected, his eyes reflecting lantern light. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped. "Some secrets stay buried for a reason." And then she realized. The Lantern Man wasn't a ghost at all. He'd been waiting in the shadows, alive. And he knew her father's name. Black Hollow Road was not always infamous. Long ago, it was just a narrow country lane winding through the dense pines of Coldwater County. But for the past 50 years, it has carried a different reputation, a road people avoided after sunset, a name whispered in diners and gas stations with nervous glances over the shoulder. They said a man stood there at midnight, holding a brass lantern that glowed with a strange, greenish light. No one could remember exactly when the stories began, but everyone swore they were true. Truck drivers passing through claimed to see him first, a figure standing near the crooked oak at mile marker 6, motionless, as though waiting for something, or someone. Some described him as tall and gaunt, others as hunched and limping, but every witness remembered the lantern. Its light didn't sway like fire. It pulsed, steady and unnatural, as if it were alive. Most drivers pressed harder on the gas, afraid to look in their rearview mirrors. The unlucky few who slowed down said the man would raise the lantern high, signaling them to stop. But when they passed, he was gone, leaving only fog curling across the asphalt. Parents used the tale to scare their children into coming home before dark. Teenagers dared each other to drive the road at midnight, headlights off, searching for the figure. Some returned pale and trembling, swearing they'd seen him standing in the middle of the road. Others never came back at all, their cars later found abandoned near the tree line, doors wide open, engines still running. The police wrote it off as drunk driving, joyriding, or runaways, but people in town knew better. The Lantern Man was out there, keeping his midnight vigil. Old-timers told different versions of his origin. Some said he was Tommy Barrett, a farmhand falsely accused of theft and run out of town, doomed to wander with the lantern he once used for his night chores. Others whispered it was Sheriff Ray Harlow, who disappeared in '75 after sticking his nose where it didn't belong. But the most unsettling theory came from those who lowered their voices to a whisper, that the Lantern Man wasn't a ghost at all, but someone alive, hiding in the woods, guarding a terrible secret no one dared to name. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: no one could drive down Black Hollow Road at midnight without feeling the weight of unseen eyes. The crooked oak loomed like a sentinel, and the faint glow of that lantern, real or imagined, sent a shiver down every traveler's spine. Over time, the legend grew thicker than the fog that blanketed the road each autumn night, until it was impossible to tell where rumor ended and reality began. Half a century had passed since the Lantern Man was first spotted on Black Hollow Road, yet his presence never truly faded from the town's memory. Time should have dulled the fear, but instead it turned into something deeper, an unspoken agreement not to ask questions. Children who once trembled at bedtime stories grew up to be adults who locked their doors a little earlier, avoiding the road after dark as if by instinct. The passage of years didn't erase the legend, it made it heavier, more rooted, like a shadow passed down from generation to generation. The sheriff's department kept dusty files on missing travelers, unexplained accidents, and witness reports of a man with a lantern. But each new sheriff eventually learned the same lesson: the cases led nowhere. Evidence vanished, witnesses contradicted each other, and any attempt to investigate further ended with sudden silence from townsfolk who didn't want trouble. Black Hollow Road became more than a stretch of asphalt, it was a wound no one dared to reopen. The few who tried to dig deeper often disappeared themselves, not into thin air, but into quiet resignation. Journalists came and went, writing half-finished articles before packing their bags and leaving Coldwater County behind. Residents avoided eye contact when asked about 1975, as if some invisible line had been drawn through history, separating what could be spoken of from what must stay buried. The town learned to live with the Lantern Man, the way people live with an unsolved crime, by pretending it never happened. The 50-year silence wasn't natural. It felt too deliberate, as though someone had worked hard to keep the truth hidden. Road maintenance crews paved over cracks and cleared debris, but they never touched the crooked oak at mile marker 6. Families who'd lost loved ones to the road stopped asking questions. Even newcomers, people who'd never heard the old stories, spoke of a strange heaviness when driving past the hollow at night, as though they knew without being told that something waited there, patient and watchful. This long silence turned the Lantern Man into something larger than life. Was he a ghost stuck in time? A man who never aged? Or a warning no one understood? 50 years was long enough for facts to decay into rumor, but not long enough for the fear to die. Every anniversary of that fateful summer of 1975 brought fresh whispers, new sightings, and a chilling reminder that whatever happened on Black Hollow Road had never truly ended. Clara Dempsey never planned to return to Coldwater County. After leaving for college 2 decades ago, she built a career in the city as an investigative journalist, exposing corruption and digging into scandals most people were afraid to touch. But when her father died unexpectedly, she had no choice but to come home, if only to settle his estate. Clara expected grief, old memories, maybe a few uncomfortable conversations with neighbors, but she didn't expect to find her family tied to the most infamous legend of the town. Her father, Eli Dempsey, had been a respected mechanic and the sort of man everyone trusted with their cars and their secrets. To Clara, he was quiet, meticulous, and private, but never cruel. That image began to crack when she climbed into his attic to sort through decades of belongings. Among the rusted tools and dusty boxes of old photographs, she found a heavy lockbox sealed with a tarnished latch. Inside were maps, newspaper clippings about Black Hollow Road, and a single photograph of a young man holding a lantern, the same brass lantern described in every sighting. On the back of the photo, in her father's handwriting, were 5 words: July 3, 1975, don't forget what we buried. The discovery hit Clara harder than she wanted to admit. Why would her father have kept evidence tied to the Lantern Man? Why had he never spoken of that summer? Every clue pointed to something deeply personal, and perhaps dangerous. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she remembered strange things from her childhood, nights when her father came home late, smelling of soil and gasoline, whispered arguments between him and her mother, neighbors who looked at him with respect tinged by something else, fear. Clara's instincts as a journalist clashed with her feelings as a daughter. In her career, the rule was simple: follow the facts wherever they lead. But what if those facts led to her own family? Could she really investigate the man who raised her? Could she face whatever truth lay buried for 50 years? The weight of personal loyalty pressed against her hunger for answers, and the Lantern Man's shadow fell directly across her own name. As she walked through the quiet rooms of her childhood home, Clara couldn't escape the feeling that someone, or something, already knew she'd opened that box. The neighbors watched her with cautious eyes, the phone rang at odd hours with no voice on the other end, and more than once she thought she saw a glimmer of lantern light at the edge of the woods behind the house. Whatever her father had been part of, it wasn't just history. It was alive. And now, so was Clara's involvement. The attic of Clara's childhood home smelled of dust, cedar, and the faint tang of something long forgotten. Sunlight slanted through the small triangular window, catching on cobwebs and illuminating decades of accumulated memories. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, each labeled in her father's careful, looping handwriting. Clara's fingers traced the edges of a particularly heavy box near the back corner, one she hadn't noticed as a child. Its latch was rusted, but she managed to pry it open with a screwdriver she found nearby. The moment it clicked open, a sense of foreboding swept over her, a silent warning she almost ignored. Inside, the box was a trove of secrets. There were maps of Black Hollow Road marked with strange symbols and dates, newspaper clippings about disappearances and minor accidents, and handwritten notes with cryptic instructions. But what caught her breath was a photograph, a young man holding a brass lantern that glowed faintly even in the black and white image. On the back, scrawled in her father's handwriting, were the words, July 3, 1975, "Don't forget what we buried." It was the first tangible connection between her father and the infamous Lantern Man, a chilling link she had never suspected existed. Her eyes fell on a yellowed envelope tucked beneath the photograph. Inside were letters, penned by someone who called themselves a friend of the Hollow, warning Eli Dempsey to keep the secret and never speak of that night again. The letters hinted at betrayal, fear, and danger, emotions that seemed far too adult for the quiet mechanic she had grown up knowing. Clara realized that for years, her father had been guarding more than a family legacy. He had been protecting a truth so dark it could destroy lives. Each note, each marking on the maps, seemed to pulse with an urgency that demanded she understand the story behind the Lantern Man. As Clara sifted through the contents, she discovered fragments of personal accounts and confessions. Witnesses had written about the night someone disappeared near the Crooked Oak, about a man with a lantern standing silently in the fog. Names were mentioned, some familiar, some she had never heard. And there, in careful handwriting, was her father's name, connected to each account in subtle, cryptic ways. The realization was dizzying. Not only had her father known more than anyone else, he might have been at the center of the events that shaped the legend itself. With each discovery, the attic seemed to close in around her. The wind rattled the window, dust motes danced in the shafts of light, and Clara felt the unmistakable weight of eyes, unseen, but undeniably present. She could almost hear the faint hum of the lantern, calling her to follow the clues further, deeper into the mystery. Each item she uncovered felt like a thread, and she knew instinctively that pulling on one could unravel decades of silence, secrets, and fear. And yet, despite the danger, Clara felt an irresistible pull to continue, to understand what her father had been protecting all these years. As Clara began speaking with the remaining townsfolk, she quickly realized that memory was a slippery thing. Each person she interviewed remembered the summer of 1975 differently, and no two accounts matched. One elderly woman insisted she had seen a tall, gaunt man with a lantern standing by the Crooked Oak every night for weeks, while her neighbors swore it had only been a single night, and the figure had disappeared before anyone could get close. The contradictions were dizzying, yet each story carried the same underlying fear, the same sense of something terrible lurking just beyond sight. Some townsfolk insisted the Lantern Man was Tommy Barrett, a farmhand accused of theft and run out of town. According to these accounts, he had returned one last time to exact revenge or perhaps to hide evidence of a crime no one else knew about. Others claimed it was Sheriff Ray Harlow, who vanished the same week and was rumored to have stumbled upon secrets that put him in mortal danger. Each testimony contained small, specific details: the tilt of the lantern, the way the figure moved, the pattern of his appearances, but they rarely agreed. Clara felt like she was chasing shadows, and every story pulled her deeper into a maze of half-truths. Even within families, accounts clashed. A father would insist the Lantern Man had been there, waiting silently, while his adult children swore the figure had never appeared on their family property at all. Old photographs, faded letters, and diary entries seemed to confirm one story while contradicting another. Clara began to realize that fear had a way of reshaping memory, turning witnesses into storytellers, and storytellers into mythmakers. The legend was alive, evolving with each retelling, growing more complex with every new voice. Despite the conflicting accounts, one detail remained constant: the brass lantern. Everyone who claimed to have seen the figure mentioned it, and each description carried an almost supernatural quality. Some said the light glowed green, others amber, some said it never flickered, others said it pulsed like a heartbeat. The discrepancies were unsettling, yet Clara couldn't ignore the consistency of its presence. The lantern was more than an object, it was a symbol, a clue, and perhaps the key to understanding what had truly happened all those years ago. As Clara pieced together the testimonies, a pattern began to emerge, subtle but undeniable. Certain names, locations, and dates repeated across stories, even when the details differed. It was as if the town itself remembered, selectively and imperfectly, fragments of a truth it feared to reveal. Clara realized that while no single testimony could provide the full answer, the contradictions themselves were important, pointing toward hidden connections, untold secrets, and a danger that still lingered in the shadows of Black Hollow Road. Clara knew that if she were going to uncover the truth, she would have to face Black Hollow Road herself. One night, she drove down the narrow, fog-shrouded lane, headlights dimmed to a sliver of light, heart hammering in her chest. The air was thick and cold, carrying the scent of wet pine and decaying leaves. Every mile felt longer than the last, as if the road itself were stretching, testing her resolve. She clutched the steering wheel tightly, eyes darting toward the treeline, listening to the crunch of her tires on the gravel, convinced that at any moment, she would see it, the glow of the brass lantern that had haunted the town for decades. And then, at exactly 12:13 a.m., there it was. A figure standing motionless by the crooked oak at mile marker 6, a lantern held high. Its light cast a strange green glow that seemed to pierce the fog, illuminating nothing but the figure itself. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to speed past, to escape, yet something compelled her to slow down. She could feel the electricity in the air, the weight of decades pressing down as if the road, the trees, and the figure itself were holding their breath. Her eyes strained to make out details. The man was tall, shoulders hunched slightly, and his movements were deliberate as if rehearsed for decades. The lantern's light pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat, and Clara felt an inexplicable chill ripple through her spine. She wanted to call out, to demand answers, but her voice faltered. In the eerie silence, all she could hear was the whisper of the wind and the distant rustle of leaves. It felt like she was standing on the threshold of something ancient, something meant to be hidden from the world. Slowly, she edged the car closer, hoping to get a better look. For a moment, the figure raised the lantern higher, and the green glow spread across the road like a living thing. Clara could see the contours of the man's face, sharp and gaunt, but in the next instant, he was gone. No footprints, no sound, just an empty patch of fog and the lingering echo of the lantern's glow. Her heart raced, and the hairs on her arms stood on end. For a fleeting second, she questioned her own eyes, wondering if exhaustion and stress were playing tricks on her mind, but deep down, she knew what she had seen was real. The encounter left her shaken, yet oddly compelled. She could not deny the pull of the mystery, the feeling that this was more than a story, more than legend. Something about the figure seemed to know her, to recognize her presence, as if decades of silence had been waiting for this moment. Clara felt an urgent need to continue, to uncover the truth behind the Lantern Man and the secret her father had kept hidden for 50 years. That single midnight encounter had changed everything, and yet, it was only the beginning. Guided by the map she had found in her father's attic, Clara ventured into the dense woods behind the crooked oak. The night was still, almost oppressively quiet, broken only by the occasional snap of twigs beneath her boots. The fog clung to the forest floor like a living thing, curling around tree trunks and roots. Her flashlight flickered against the damp earth, illuminating patches of moss and gnarled roots, but it was the map that kept her moving, a cryptic path marked with small XS and the date July 3, 1975. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself resisted her intrusion. After what felt like hours, she reached a small clearing where the ground appeared strangely disturbed, as though someone had dug and filled a hole decades ago. Her heart pounded as she knelt down, brushing away leaves and dirt with trembling hands. Soon, the edges of a rusted metal box emerged, covered in layers of roots and soil. She pulled it free with great effort, the weight of the box pressing down like the past itself. Something about the discovery felt final, yet terrifying, a bridge between the world of legend and a reality she had been chasing for weeks. Opening the box revealed a chilling scene. Inside were human bones, bleached and brittle from 50 years underground. Nestled among them were personal items that immediately drew Clara's attention: a tarnished sheriff's badge, a gold wedding ring, and a small fragment of cloth, stained and delicate with age. The items suggested a story of betrayal, violence, and secrecy, each object a clue to a puzzle that had remained unsolved for half a century. She ran her fingers over the badge and felt a shiver, realizing that someone had wanted these items hidden, wanted the truth buried deep beneath the earth. Clara's mind raced. Whose bones were these? How were they connected to the Lantern Man? And most importantly, what had her father known about this burial? Each item felt like a message sent across time, a warning, and a confession all at once. The forest seemed to close in around her, the fog thickening as though trying to erase her presence. She felt eyes on her again, unseen but unmistakable, as if someone, or something, had been waiting for her to uncover this grave. The weight of 50 years of silence pressed down with a force she could almost physically feel. Despite the horror and the fear, Clara felt a compulsion to keep going. The grave had answered some questions, but it had also raised dozens more. The fragments of the past, the objects, and the bones themselves hinted at a story far more complex and dangerous than she could have imagined. The forest, the grave, the lantern, all were connected in ways she could not yet comprehend. And yet, she knew instinctively that leaving now would mean walking away from the truth her father had fought to protect, a truth that had remained buried for 50 long years. Clara froze as a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees beyond the clearing. At first, she thought it was a trick of the fog, a movement of branches, or her imagination playing cruel games. But then she saw him clearly, tall, gaunt, and carrying the same brass lantern she had only glimpsed in photographs and legend. The light cast long, eerie shadows across his face, illuminating sharp features lined with age and secrets. It was him, the Lantern Man, and yet, impossibly, he was alive. Her pulse raced as she studied him, trying to reconcile the decades of stories with the reality standing before her. The man's eyes glinted in the lantern light, old and calculating, yet unmistakably human. There was a presence in him, a patience honed over 50 years of waiting, that made Clara feel small and exposed. He did not speak at first, he simply regarded her with the weight of someone who had witnessed countless intrusions into his domain. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, but curiosity, duty, and an unshakable need to uncover the truth held her in place. The lantern he carried seemed more than a simple object, it was a symbol, a guide, and a warning. Its greenish glow flickered faintly, revealing glimpses of the ground she had just dug, the rusted box, and the scattered roots. She realized with a shiver that he had been observing her long before she even entered the woods. Every step she had taken, every movement she had made, had been anticipated. The stories, the warnings, the decades of fear, they had all been carefully orchestrated to prepare for this moment. As he stepped closer, Clara could see the marks of time etched into his hands, the way his fingers curled around the lantern as if it were both a weapon and a shield. There was a weight to him, a quiet authority that made her heart pound and her mind reel. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat. It was as if he had been waiting not just for her, but for the revelation of her father's role, for the unearthing of the grave, for her presence to connect the past and the present in one fateful moment. Despite the fear, there was something almost magnetic about him, a dark allure that drew her closer even as every fiber of her being screamed to retreat. The living lantern man was not a ghost, nor a relic of memory. He was real, dangerous, and intimately tied to the secrets that had been buried for 50 years. Clara felt the weight of understanding pressing down on her, knowing that this encounter was not random. The figure before her held the answers, but he also held the power to change everything, and he knew her father's name. Clara's mind raced as she looked at the living lantern man, the realization hitting her like a blow. Her father had been part of this all along. Eli Dempsey, the quiet, respected mechanic she had grown up admiring, had kept secrets so dark they had festered in the shadows of Black Hollow Road for 50 years. The betrayal was not just to the town, but to her, to the family she thought she knew. Her father had hidden truths that could rewrite everything she believed about him, about her childhood, and about the stories that haunted her for decades. The letters, the maps, the photograph, the burial in the woods, all pointed to one undeniable fact: her father had been involved in something far more sinister than she could have imagined. Perhaps he had helped cover up a crime, or perhaps he had been protecting someone else's secret. Each revelation was a dagger twisting in her chest, mixing anger with confusion and sorrow. The very man who had comforted her as a child, taught her to ride a bike, and fixed her broken toys had also been part of a darkness she was only now beginning to understand. The betrayal was made worse by her father's silence. For years, she had trusted him, confided in him, and relied on him as a guide through the complexities of life. And all the while, he had carried a secret so heavy that it had shaped the town's history and cost lives. Clara wondered what had compelled him to stay silent. Fear? Guilt? Loyalty? Whatever the reason, the weight of his choices now fell squarely on her shoulders. She had unearthed the truth, yet she felt powerless in the face of the man standing before her, the lantern man who had been waiting for decades. Her emotions collided: grief, anger, and an aching desire for answers. She wanted to confront her father, to demand why he had allowed the town to live under the shadow of fear, why he had allowed the deaths, the disappearances, and the lies. Yet the man in front of her, the one who had kept vigil for 50 years, made her hesitate. Every instinct screamed that understanding the full scope of the betrayal would be dangerous, and that the answers she sought might carry consequences she could not yet foresee. Even as she stood there, frozen in the foggy woods, Clara began to realize that the personal betrayal extended beyond her father alone. The lantern man's presence suggested a wider network of secrets and alliances, of pacts made in the shadows and promises kept at the cost of morality. Her father had not acted alone. The darkness had reached further than she had imagined. And now, with the grave unearthed and the living lantern man confronting her, Clara understood that uncovering the truth would force her to face not just her father's betrayal, but the betrayal woven into the very history of Black Hollow Road itself. Even as Clara stared at the living lantern man, clutching the brass lantern like a relic of decades-long secrets, the questions multiplied faster than answers. Who exactly had been buried in that grave? Was it one of the missing townsfolk, or someone else entirely? And why had her father, Eli Dempsey, been so intimately involved in keeping it hidden? Every piece of evidence she uncovered only deepened the mystery, hinting at a story far larger than she could have imagined, a story that spanned decades of fear, deception, and silence. The items she had found in the grave, the tarnished sheriff's badge, the gold wedding ring, and the fragment of cloth, offered tantalizing clues, yet they raised more doubts than certainty. Could the sheriff's badge indicate corruption or betrayal among those sworn to protect the town? Was the wedding ring a symbol of a love lost, a crime of passion, or a familial connection that no one had dared acknowledge? Clara realized that each object, though tangible, was a key to a puzzle whose picture she could not yet see. Clara also grappled with the identity of the lantern man himself. If he was alive, watching, and waiting all these years, what had been his true purpose? Was he seeking justice, revenge, or merely ensuring that the secrets stayed buried? The very presence of this figure blurred the line between legend and reality, leaving her to question what had been fabricated by rumor and what had actually happened on that fateful night of 1975. The road, the grave, the lantern, all seemed connected in a way that only he fully understood. The unresolved mysteries gnawed at Clara, even as she considered the consequences of uncovering them. Who else might still be alive, hiding in the shadows, waiting to intervene if the truth surfaced? And if she pursued answers too aggressively, would she become the next victim of the very secret her father had spent a lifetime protecting? The tension of the unknown pressed down on her like the dense fog of Black Hollow Road, leaving her with the haunting realization that some truths were dangerous precisely because they refused to be fully revealed. As she stood among the trees, the greenish glow of the lantern casting long, wavering shadows, Clara understood that the story was far from over. Every clue, every testimony, every object from the past suggested layers of deception and hidden motives. Yet, for all the discoveries she had made, the ultimate truth remained just out of reach, a secret buried deeper than bones or letters, alive in the silence and waiting for the right moment to surface. The unanswered questions loomed larger than ever, ensuring that the legend of the Lantern Man would continue to haunt her, and the town, for years to come. Clara's heart pounded as the Lantern Man stepped closer, the greenish glow of the lantern casting long shadows across the forest floor. For a moment, she thought he might speak, reveal everything, explain the decades of fear and secrecy. But instead, he simply raised the lantern higher, its light sweeping over her and the grave she had uncovered. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the weight of 50 years of silence and hidden truths. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said at last, his voice low, roughened by time. "Some secrets stay buried for a reason." Clara's throat tightened. She had expected confrontation, answers, maybe even confession, but not this cold, unyielding warning. The realization struck her: the Lantern Man had been waiting not to punish, but to guard. The story she had been chasing was not hers to fully uncover, at least, not yet. Suddenly, the figure lifted the lantern and turned, vanishing into the fog as if he had never been there. Clara stood alone, the grave behind her, the eerie silence pressing in from all sides. The forest seemed unchanged, but everything in her world had shifted. She knew that the truth her father had kept, the reason for the disappearances, and the identity of the Lantern Man himself were still out there, hidden in the shadows of Black Hollow Road. With trembling hands, Clara closed the rusted box, burying the items again as much for her own safety as out of respect for the dead. She walked back to her car, every sense on alert, aware that unseen eyes might still be following her. The road stretched ahead, dark and fog-laden, carrying with it the whispers of decades, of stories untold, and of a mystery that refused to die. As she drove away, the crooked oak faded behind her, but the memory of the lantern's glow lingered, haunting her dreams and her thoughts. The Lantern Man remained an enigma, a guardian of secrets buried for 50 years, and Clara understood that some truths are never meant to be fully unearthed. The road, the legend, and the figure in the fog would live on, waiting for the next curious soul brave, or foolish, enough to follow the lantern's light. The Lantern Man of Black Hollow Road remains a mystery, a secret buried for over 50 years. Will the truth ever be fully revealed? Or will the shadows continue to guard what lies beneath? Only time will tell. If you dare to uncover more chilling legends, stay with us here at Graveyard of Secrets. **